Okay, great stuff.
Welcome to today's eLearning Network webinar, which today is being run by Dan, Nolan and Cameron Glennon, who work at Virtual College. Now, if you were in earlier on before we started recording, you'll know that they're up in Ilkley in Yorkshire. So I'm not going to say too much more. I'm just going to hand over to the guys. Other than, just a bit of housekeeping. If you do want to comment, make comments, ask questions, please use the chat function because you are all on mute for the duration of the webinar. We are recording it. It will go up on YouTube and on our eLN website. But otherwise, enjoy.
Great. Thank you very much, Joan. Yes, so hello everyone. Thanks for joining. So my name's Cam Glennon from Virtual College. So I'm a learning technology consultant and specialise in bespoke content development, but really interested in learning cultures and growth mindset.
Yep, and I'm Dan Nolan. I'm also a learning technology consultant, and I also specialise in bespoke content development. And like Cam, yeah, I'm really interested in working with organisations, particularly around their learning cultures, what's going on with their learning strategies, and I guess supporting them in those kind of areas. So just when we go into this, I'm just going to turn our webcam off. Okay, so we're going to talk to you today around how a growth mindset contributes to a learning culture. So we're just going to get straight into it.
Yeah, and as Joan said, if you have any questions or any comments throughout, then please use the chat function. So I'm more than happy to kind of stop and answer. Yeah. So yeah, first it'd be great to kind of touch on what is a learning culture, but I think more importantly, what does it mean to have a learning culture? So I think the phrase learning culture is something that's banded around quite a lot these days. So we thought it'd be good to give a clear definition to start with, so we all kind of are on the same page. So for us, the way we're defining it is learning culture is making learning a priority through every level of your organisation. So I think on the surface, that does seem kind of fair enough and fairly simple. I think if we all go to our managers or senior leadership teams and say, do you want to do better at your job? Do you want to improve? Do you want to grow in your role? They would all say yes. But practically when the pressures of daily work starts to build up, is that kind of development and learning really at the forefront of our minds? It's probably not. We're probably firefighting. We've got things to fix. We've got deadlines to meet. So actually the time we dedicate to learn and to improve ourselves probably gets pushed to the back. So why is this important? So I mean, I think if you consider how roles are changing within L&D, but across the workspace in general, in the next sort of 10 to 15 years, the role of technology is going to change job roles drastically. There's going to be roles that don't actually exist yet, using technology that's not being invented. So actually, we need to really have that ability to be change agile and be able to embrace change and kind of be able to learn new skills and apply the soft skills or the multiplier skills that we already have in these new settings.
Yeah, I think I'd definitely gone are the days of sort of where you had a career where you developed one set of skills and for 20, 30, 40 years, you built upon those skills and got better at that. But that was the core of what you did. But there's a phrase we sort of use here, the new skill is sort of getting better at getting better and being able to learn more quickly and efficiently. And we definitely think a big part of that is really underpinned by growth mindset. And just first of all, it's probably just good to cover off what is growth mindset. So, I mean, growth mindset has been around for a pretty long amount of time now. So there's over 20 years of research that's gone into this. It's been very much led by a woman called Caroline Dweck. And she's led the theory that people have two main mindsets. You either have sort of a growth or a fixed mindset. And as individuals, you're not 100% growth or 100% fixed. You're somewhere on an equilibrium between the two. So you may be very particularly sort of growth mindset in your working environment, but actually in your home life, you could have a fixed mindset. So it depends situation to situation as well. So why does this matter? Well, having a growth mindset really matters because the four areas that are just popping up in front of you now, they're really key to development and growth. And whether you have a fixed or a growth mindset definitely dictates how you interact with these four core areas. So take challenge first of all. So people with a fixed mindset will probably go out of their way to avoid challenges. They won't like the fact that challenges could potentially highlight weaknesses in them or can make them look bad, or even worse, they fail at something, which to them is seen as something very negative. Whereas if you were looking at challenge with a growth mindset, you would embrace challenges. You would see them as something that is vital to your growth, and you'll actually start to enjoy taking on challenges. They'll become really important to you to take on.
Yeah, exactly. I think that links in really nicely with effort. So if I was someone with a fixed mindset, I don't see the value in effort. I think that I'm in a static state, therefore I'm either good or I'm bad at something. And if I have to put effort into doing something, that must mean that I'm not good at it and I don't want to do it. Whereas if you flip that on your head and I'm someone with a growth mindset, I approach that at the fact that the task is more difficult is a positive. Throughout that journey, it gives me an opportunity to learn new skills, to learn necessarily what not to do as well. And actually, at the end, the value of what I've completed, I perceive the value to be greater because the challenge has been to get to that point because I've had to put some effort in. It's not just given to me on a plate.
Yeah. And absolutely, if you're taking on challenges and putting effort in, mistakes are probably going to be unavoidable. But if you've got a fixed mindset, mistakes, again, are seen as something that's incredibly negative and they're to be avoided at all costs. If you make a mistake, you've probably done badly, and you'll want to hide the mistakes that you've made and not be open and honest about them. Whereas someone with a growth mindset who is taking on challenges, who is putting effort in, will see mistakes as something that's unavoidable, and actually they'll recognize in their core that they get the most from making mistakes. They learn the most from this, and they're really valuable and something to be, I guess, analysed and seen. Okay, how can this mistake make me better tomorrow?
Yeah, exactly. And again, that links perfectly into feedback. So someone with a fixed mindset, I don't appreciate constructive feedback. I see that as criticism. I get on the defensive. I think that's Dan saying to me, "Oh, I could have done that job better," or "You should have done this, you should have done that," and actually, why did you not do your job properly? And I'm probably just going to carry on as I always do and think, I know more than Dan, so I'm happy with how I've done that. I'm just going to crack on. Whereas with a growth mindset, someone really sees that feedback as an opportunity to learn and improve. And they would rather receive constructive criticism than simply a pat on the back and saying, "Well done." And I think we can probably all agree that the vast majority of the time we do not complete something that's challenging with 100% accuracy or to the 100% of our ability. So it's great to know that actually this was brilliant and the output has gone well, but have you thought about engaging your stakeholders internally a little bit better? Or have you thought about being a little bit more concise in that report that you wrote?
And when we're talking about these 4 key areas, we've obviously given you sort of extreme examples, like, for example, effort. Someone with a fixed mindset doesn't see the value of effort. We're not saying that if you walked up to someone with a fixed mindset and said, "Oh, do you think effort's valuable?" they'd turn around and say no. The difference is in their core, they do not believe it to be true. So they might say the words, but in terms of how they'll act and what they believe in, they don't necessarily agree with it.
Yeah, so I think basically people with a growth mindset almost go hunting for that negative feedback and asking the question, "What can I do better?"
So we've given you a very brief overview there of what growth mindset is. So let's start talking about what it isn't, because there are a couple of myths knocking around about it, and it's definitely worth clearing up. So first of all, this is a really important one. Growth mindset is not all about profits. It's not about short-term KPIs. It's not about okay, so as an organisation or as people, we're going to introduce growth mindset, and then we're going to measure it. Month 1, have we made any more money? Month 2, month 3, up to a year. If you approach it from that perspective, you're probably approaching it in a bit of a fixed mindset way, and you're really going to struggle. Definitely, if you manage to get your people within your organisations and yourself bought into growth mindset and having growth mindset, things like creativity, things like innovation will increase, and those things lead to exponential growth. But yeah, if you start trying to measure it over short-term KPIs, you're really going to struggle.
Exactly. And so that organisations, myth 2, that organisations have a growth mindset. Again, that's not correct. The organisation itself is just an entity. It does not have anything. The individuals make up that organisation, and it's the individuals that have the growth mindsets. So if you hear CEOs walking around and saying, "Oh, my organisation has a growth mindset," that's incorrect. It's the individuals that have that. And I know that might feel like a bit of a bit too, just looking at the semantics too much. But I think it's an important distinction to make.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point. If you say, if a CEO is walking around saying my people have a growth mindset, then you're kind of missing the fact that people are on an equilibrium. Actually, all of your people are in a bit of a different place, and those people will need support in different ways. So you need to recognise that it really sits with the people.
Exactly. And so myth 3, that anyone can be an opera singer. And so I like this. This is one of my favourite ones. So I'm sure we all heard growing up that if you put your mind to it, you can do anything. So whether that is someone who wants to be a rock star, someone who wants to be a professional athlete, someone who wants to be a musician. And obviously that we're not saying that children should not be encouraged to chase their dreams, of course not. But actually there has to be a realisation that as much as I wanted to be a professional footballer, I'm simply not good enough to do it in terms of my talent and potentially my drive. So what I can do is I can be better tomorrow than I am today. So I guess it's almost framing it as the competition is against myself and how can I continue to improve, rather than simply compare myself to others within the organisation.
Yeah, how can you be the best you can be at something? How can you get better in your individual skills, in the things that you want to be good at?
And I think actually, if you think everyone within the organisation can be the MD, for example, then potentially distracting employees and actually probably intimidating quite a few of them. And if they're only focused on how can they improve individually, then that's a nice way to go.
Yeah. So we kind of covered this one a little bit earlier. You're either fixed or growth mindset. You're definitely not. You're somewhere on an equilibrium between the two. And as I mentioned, in different areas of your life, you may sit in different places on that equilibrium. And that's quite important to recognise, because if there is an area where you're saying your hobbies or something like that, where you do have a growth mindset, well, that's a great example to try and pull that into your other areas of life. Think about how you're thinking about around that kind of area and think, right, what can I take from that into my working life potentially? And finally, growth mindset means having a positive, can-do attitude no matter what. That's absolutely not the case. I think it can definitely be used as a stick to beat people over the head with a little bit if it's implemented in the wrong kind of way. At the end of the day, we're all human. We all have shit days from time to time, and that's absolutely fine. What you need if you're implementing something like growth mindset is a supportive and collaborative environment.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I'm just going to jump in and say that actually when we first started looking at this at Virtual College, probably 6 to 12 months ago, we probably heard a couple of times during the office someone saying, oh, that's not a very growth mindset way of approaching that. Or think about your growth mindset when someone says, oh, I can't do this, or I struggle with maths, or I'm not good at that.
Yeah.
And it is, all you're going to do is annoy that other person there. Yeah. And it's definitely changed. I can't remember last time I've heard that.
Yeah, I've not heard it for a long time. But yeah, it's about being more supportive, not turning around and saying, oh, you're not approaching things with a growth mindset. Definitely. So we've got our first poll here, and we'd be really interested to get your thoughts on whether or not you have a growth mindset.
We should answer that.
I don't think we can.
I added the not sure option, guys. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Just a quick one. Where do we see the results out of interest?
I'll publish them once we stop running the poll. So
okay, great.
I think I can do it now because I think everybody's voted very quickly. Can you see that?
Okay. Great stuff. Yeah. So we've got no no's, a few not sure's, and a lot of yes, which is obviously good.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, so both Dan and I have played a lot of sport growing up, so we kind of had from that sporting perspective feel like we had a growth mindset, and definitely from a work perspective, I would have said 100% I have a growth mindset. I want to be the best I can. I'm happy to improve. I want people to point out when I do things wrong. But then when we looked a little bit deeper, there were a couple of examples where potentially I didn't approach it from the right way. So one of them is if you're sat in a meeting with senior leaders, for example, or people who are more senior than yourself, and someone's talking about something, and you sat there thinking, I really don't understand what's going on here. I don't know what we're talking about. How often will just someone put their hand up and say, I'm really sorry, but I don't understand that. Could you just quickly update me so that I can potentially add value later in the conversation? I know for a fact that I've sat in meetings with those senior leaders not knowing what they were talking about, and sat there and kind of smiled and nodded for a bit and tried to work it out, and then maybe ask someone afterwards. That's not necessarily approaching that from the right way. So therefore, in the future, that's something that I'm definitely trying to work on.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting for us when we started reflecting. I suppose it's only fair that we answered this question as well. And I think it's definitely sort of, some of the time, but it's something that takes constant attention, constant reflecting on what you're thinking about things. I think it's very easy when someone says to you that you've done something wrong to get defensive, and it can be quite difficult.
Yeah, and just looking at some of the comments that are coming in. So, Jones, it takes confidence, and of course it does. And that's something that is trying to work on. And again, Michelle, and a supportive leadership team, which is completely true as well. And I know for a fact that we have that here. And I should have the confidence to be able to do that, and that's something that I'm working on.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely, we're going to come on to that later. The environment is so incredibly important to foster this and to support people with this. So I 100% agree. There will probably be some organisations out there that people are working for where they don't feel like they can do that, and it might not be the right place for them to start doing that. But that's definitely something we're going to come on to, because the environment is very important. Okay. So we talked to you about a growth mindset, but and what that is, and it's good to get your thoughts on what mindsets you think you all have. Now we're going to talk about the challenges of implementing a growth mindset, because there's a lot of information out there around what it is and how we should think and what we should change. But actually, it's incredibly difficult for people and organisations to start making those changes, and it does take a lot of work. And I think when you think about the world that a lot of us have grown up in and live in now, it's not too difficult to see why it is quite a difficult thing. So on the face of it, the science behind growth mindset is pretty simple. It's not too difficult to understand, and it seems pretty logical, I think, to most people. It makes a lot of sense. But I can remember that when I was at school, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people here that will think the same thing as me, but getting a piece of homework back covered in the dreaded red pen with a big circle at the bottom of it with written in it, "Come see me after this lesson," and then you'd go and take that piece of homework home, and if your mum was anything like my mum, she'd go absolutely nuts, and it had been like I'd been selling drugs or something, but actually I've just done one bad piece of homework. I think from that side, from an early age, from school, from parents, a lot of us have had constant reinforcement that mistakes are incredibly negative. Mistakes are a really bad thing and to be avoided at all costs. And then we've moved into our adult lives and gone into a workplace with a bunch of other people who've had the same experiences at school and the same experiences with their parents potentially, and they are reinforcing that idea that mistakes actually are really bad. We can't afford to make them. We must perform all the time, and if you've made a mistake, you're a failure. So when we're living in that world, it is actually incredibly difficult to try and reinforce growth mindset and shift people's mindset. So we have a responsibility now to really support people in that move. And it kind of, I mean, what I was describing there sounds a bit horrifically negative, I guess. And it sounds like it's building up a bit of an impossible obstacle, but I promise you it's not. It's just something that does take a lot of focus, a lot of hard work, and a lot of support. And that's where the organisations come in and management comes in and thinking about the environment that we're putting our people in.
Yeah, and I guess just to give you a little bit of context of where we are as Virtual College. So over the past 12 months or so, we've been going through a rebrand. And so we realised quite quickly that going through rebrands doesn't simply mean let's change the colour and let's change the logo. So we had to really dig a little bit deeper and understand what makes us tick as an organisation and what makes us tick as individuals and what we're passionate about. So as part of that, we had a number of sessions. So we had some open forums, some discussion workshops, style sessions, but we also had a survey that was sent out, and we're going to run through some of those results in a second. But essentially, the conclusion from the survey was that we didn't have a learning culture. So just to let that settle for a second, we are a learning and development organisation, and we didn't have a learning culture. So we understood that actually something has to be done about that. And so let's just quickly jump through some of those.
Yeah, so I mean, it is pretty stark, and it does sort of show how easily, we're an organisation that's full of people that believe in learning and the importance of learning, but because we've not had the attention on ourselves, we'd lost the learning culture within our own organisation. So we did a survey, and the results are pretty fascinating, really. We're hoping to follow this up with another survey quite soon. Yeah, to hopefully see my...
Do not share the results if it hasn't.
Yeah, if it hasn't changed, no one will see that survey. No, so 36% of our people said you can always learn things, but fundamentally you can't change how smart you are. I mean, that's a pretty incredible result, that 36% of our people think you can't change how smart you are with something like effort.
Yeah.
41% of people agreed that they like doing work that they could do perfectly all of the time. So that's obviously almost half of our people that are avoiding challenges and perceiving challenges is actually something that's quite negative. And 34% agreed that when they put extra work in, it made them feel not as good as their peers. So they are perceiving effort as something that is negative, not something that's positive, where actually we love our people putting more effort in, and we completely need to flip that perception. Absolutely. So as Cam said, we recognized this, we looked at this and realized there were things that we needed to put in place to change our environment.
Yeah, so it was clear that we didn't have a learning culture, so it was obviously clear that we have to do something about it. And actually, I've seen Michelle Parry-Slater pop up a few times in the chat box. So, hi, Michelle. So she's been involved in supporting us on this journey as well, which has been great. And essentially what we did is we pulled together a working group across Virtual College, which had people from different teams, different business functions, but with different backgrounds and different opinions. The initial aim of the group was to actually design a training program to help us become more consultative in our approach, not only internally but externally. And I guess the logic behind that was that will improve collaboration and communication, and really help us to share knowledge and learn from each other a bit better. But during that process, we kind of found out quite quickly that we didn't have the learning culture in place to implement such a program. So we had to almost take it back a step and really focus on how do we promote that type of culture. So some of the initiatives that we have implemented, are in the process of implementing, are a social platform to encourage curated content and social learning. And this has made a massive difference for us. I mean, one of the anecdotes that we talk about a lot is that if, say, 6 months ago, Dan and myself were sat at our desk watching a TED Talk, and a senior leader walked past, we would almost feel uncomfortable, as if we've been caught out of doing something that we shouldn't do. Yeah. But actually, we've flipped that to the point now where we have senior leaders watching TED Talks at their desk, sharing, giving feedback, saying, "We really love this. I think you should watch it." Yeah. And it's really flipped that culture on its head, which has been brilliant.
Yeah, and I think if you think about think about your working day and your attention span, everyone has downtime. You can't be going 100%, 100 miles an hour all the time. So if you've got a bit of downtime, why don't you use that just to watch a TED Talk, refresh, get some new ideas coming in? It's about how you use your time and changing that perception, definitely.
I've just seen Joan pop up in the chat saying tone from the top is key, and that's completely pivotal. We'll touch on that in a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So something else that we've done is we've been setting up internal roundtable discussions, and essentially just trying to encourage open conversations where people can share. Another thing that we're really trying to do is ask the question, what have you learned today, or what have you learned this week? If you can explain something, then it means you understand it. If you can just quote something, it means that you're good at rote learning. There's definitely a difference, and we're trying to kind of acknowledge that, I guess. And then Dan's going to run through what we're calling subject matter enthusiasts.
Yeah, so we're called subject matter enthusiasts because we're definitely not subject matter experts. But what that essentially is, that's a group of people that we've brought together from across the business, from a variety of different roles, all in different areas, to look at topics that we have recognised we need to educate people on and support people with. And what we've done is we've found people that are passionate about those specific topics and those specific areas. So I am the subject matter enthusiast for growth mindset, because I'm really interested in the topic and I'm very passionate about it. But that passion is something that's so powerful when you are trying to get other people on board and other people to start, expanding their own ideas around these areas. Because me going to someone and talking to someone passionately about something is much more effective than a manager going to someone and saying, "You need to learn this."
Yeah.
it gets people bought in, and as soon as you start to attach emotions to learning, we all know that helps improve retention and improve engagement. So that program has started to be really successful, and we're using that platform that Cam mentioned to share knowledge and create spaces for sharing knowledge. We've also basic things just like educating your staff, quite simply. So we started having conversations around growth mindset over 12 months ago now, and just look at how things have taken off. So just talking about stuff is really useful.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, Dan, to jump in, just to touch on Joan's point as well, it's giving people the permission. So in that context, it's and I see someone pop up in the chat as well. It's as a manager watching these sorts of TED Talks and sharing them. And if I'm, a direct report and I can see my manager doing that, I know it's okay. So it's that permission, and it definitely has to be from top down.
Yeah. So the next point is just coming on to something that me and Cam both love. It's a TED Talk that we watched probably about 12 months ago now, I guess.
Yeah, so the TED Talk is on the performance zone versus the learning zone. So I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's by Eduardo Bricino. And it's excellent.
Yeah, we both massacred his surname a number of times, so we might have got that wrong, but I'm sure we can share a link afterwards.
Yeah, so apologies if that's incorrect. But essentially, Eduardo talks about how the performance zone is a high-stakes environment. So a sales pitch, for example, or a big scoping meeting, or some other high-stakes meeting. Whereas the learning zone is a safe environment where you can test, develop, and learn before moving into that performance zone. So essentially, when we're at school, we spend the majority of time in the learning zone where we're able to fail in a safe environment and learn. So we'll put our hand up, we'll say something that'll be incorrect, but then we know what the answer is. And next time, you hope that you know that. As soon as we enter the world of work, that completely flips. So the stakes are much higher, and we're constantly in the performance zone. The emphasis is often a lot more on the short term, and that's something that we're going to go into in a little bit more detail in a little bit. But basically, we're scared to try new things, and we revert back to the comfort zone. So, I mean, essentially, from a sales perspective, if you are targeted on a monthly basis and you've got a big sales meeting or a sales pitch, you're not going to try something new and innovative and different because you think that the stakes are too high. I need to kind of bring this money in, therefore I'm going to revert back to what I'm comfortable with. And that's kind of where you stifle that innovation.
Yeah.
But if you look at professional athletes, for an example, they probably spend about 80% of their time, if not more, in the learning zone. So a footballer will train 5 days a week, and then the performance zone is a match day on a Saturday. They might do something absolutely amazing on Saturday, but it's not out of luck, and it's not the first time they've tried it. They've been practicing that probably for years until they get to a point where they've honed that skill and they're comfortable almost broadcasting it to the world. So if that's the case with athletes, but if you look at the world of work, we don't really create the time and space for someone to be within that learning zone. So, I mean, how often do we hear managers say that a new recruit would need to hit the ground running, go outside, go make relationships, make sales, and basically start performing at 100% straight away? It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's because as soon as you talk about an athlete in the way that works, it makes complete sense. And when you're watching them do incredible things, you go, we know they train hard and they've worked hard for that. But as soon as we look at the world of work, we don't see the same thing. And we're definitely not saying, okay, let's make the world of work 80% training and 20% delivery. But at the minute, the balance is too far off. There's not enough focus on that development so people can go on and perform. And then we get surprised when things like innovation and creativity are stifled, when people are constantly asked to perform in this performance zone. So we talked about quite a lot of different points there, and quite a lot of practical steps that we've taken and steps that people can take on board. But there's one thing that is really key to this, and I've seen it pop up in the comments numerous times now, so it's good to know everyone's on the same page. But management buy-in is absolutely key. It must be in place for this to work. This is not something that can be pushed from the bottom up. You can start talking about it from the bottom up, but for it really to take on board in an organisation, it needs to be pushed from the top down. And I think a really nice way to sort of think about this is if we take an example of a manager with a fixed mindset and try and look at the world that they leave their employees in and sort of how they look at the world.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a manager with a fixed mindset. well, they'll tend to have, I guess, a binary frame of mind. So people are either superior or inferior. That means once someone's perceived as inferior, they are categorized in that area. They are kind of stuck there, and it's very difficult for them to move into that superior category. Things are very black and white. So for the manager, it's pretty clear to understand why the most important thing for them would be being perceived as superior. So they start to use a company as a platform to do that. This means they then become concerned about giving praise to others and their teams. If their team does well, they want that to be seen as their own success, because they need to be portraying that image of them being the success, not the team, which is obviously quite demotivating. They'll become very defensive to challenges. So if someone talks up and says, oh, I don't think that's quite the right idea, why don't we do this? Very often they'll get shouted down. They'll be very focused on short-term KPIs. And it's pretty obvious to see why, because short-term KPIs are a really easy way to stick your hand up and go, look at all these short-term goals that I've achieved, and look how good I am at my job. But when you don't achieve them, rather than them taking that on board and pulling the team together, blame will start to become a problem. And they'll start pointing the finger and say, well, this guy's not pulling this way. So after that, things like groupthink, they'll become really prevalent. No one's going to be prepared to stick their head above the parapet and say, oh, I disagree with this, or I've got a new idea. I think the mindset of your leaders, particularly your direct line managers, has significant impact on your life. And that's definitely in work and at home as well, especially when you start thinking about all the issues we're having with stress at the moment, and people's, I guess, mindfulness, and the problems that are coming up with mental health. And you can instantly see working for this kind of manager would be quite stressful. I don't know about anyone on the chat, but I've definitely worked for this kind of manager in the past, and it's been a pretty awful experience. I also know in my girlfriend's first job, she worked for this kind of manager, and it almost made her quit within the first 6 weeks. She did stay on, and a year later, she was one of the top performers. So it just shows the risk that having this manager can sort of have in your team. So you can be recruiting people into your business that have a growth mindset, but if they're working under this kind of manager, how long do you think that growth mindset's going to stick around? Probably not particularly long. And there is definitely a correlation between going up through the management levels and it becoming more difficult to maintain a growth mindset. There is definitely something around that. So as a manager, it's really important to focus on this kind of thing. So I'm going to pull a bit of a case study into this, and I'd be really interested to see on the chat. Does anyone know who this person is?
And which organisation he's known best for? See if anyone pops up.
Yeah.
David's got it.
Nailed it. Okay. So for those of you that don't know, this is Jack Welch. He was the CEO of GE from the early 80s until the early 2000s, so for quite a long time. He has written, I think, 4 management books.
Yeah, 4.
Around about 4 management books. He's definitely seen as a bit of a business guru, and undoubtedly, I don't doubt for a second that this man could teach me a hell of a lot about business. But one thing I probably wouldn't trust him to teach me about is people. And one of the reasons I think that is because he introduced, I guess, a kind of policy called rank and yank. I don't know whether anyone's ever heard about this before, but the policy at GE for around, and I won't say this is, I don't think this is the case now. This was when Jack was in charge. Was that for the top 10% of managers, they would promote them. Sounds pretty good. But for the bottom 10%, they would fire them. So when you start to think about that kind of world, and think about the manager that I was just describing, someone concerned about their own personal success, their own personal image, and the importance of that to them, and think about the environment that must have existed at GE at that time. You know, you can lose your job if you're not seen as one of the either the middle or the top performers. That kind of environment, building a growth mindset in there, building a learning culture in that kind of environment, how difficult do you think that would be to do? I think it'd be nigh on impossible. I don't think you could do it. I don't think that creates an environment where people will be able to stick their hands up and say, I've made a mistake. because you just simply wouldn't want to.
Yeah, and I think it's also, you wouldn't stick your hand up and say, oh, I found a better way of doing this, or I've found a new process, or I've done this more effective, or it's worked for me, and share that with my fellow managers, because all that's going to do is put pressure on me, thinking that if Dan is ranked below me and I give him this, then he's potentially going to be ranked higher than me. So that's my competitive advantage, is to hold that knowledge internally and not share it.
I think this highlights something that I've heard a lot of people talk about learning cultures, and I've heard a lot of people talk about it independently of culture, and it definitely can't be independent of culture. It is part of your culture. And I think if you don't have a culture that's built upon a foundation of trust, which we're actually writing a bit of an article about over the next few months. But if you don't have a culture built on that foundation of trust, you're going to find it very difficult to build a successful learning culture and implement things like growth mindset.
And just looking at the comments, Kevin's got a great point. So being promoted would be so dangerous, moving up and then struggling, be potentially fired next year.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's that classic short-termism.
Yeah.
Let's just think about the next 12 months rather than the long term. You might end up losing good people.
Yeah. And
because they're either forced out, or they think, you know what, I don't enjoy this environment. I can last in this sort of setting for 12 to 18 months, and then I'm burnt out and I'd rather work somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, definitely you've got to think about the overall environment and culture of your organization. And that leads quite nicely onto we've talked about it a bit already, the short term versus the long term. So I think there's definitely an imbalance at the minute in most Western companies, I would say, between short-term goals and long-term objectives. Both are obviously important. If you don't look after the short term, if you don't look after the here and now, you are not going to be there to achieve the long term. So you definitely need to look after that short term. But it's definitely more sided towards the short term than it is towards the long term. And I think if you think about the financial crash in 2008, that's a pretty clear example of people putting short-term revenue, short-term gain before the impact it would have on tomorrow and the long term. I think even when you look at the way we measure our companies, year to year, how important is financial year end? I think financial year end is a fantastic thing to be used as a health measure, but it almost seems like financial year end is the be all and end all for a lot of organisations. You think they would stop existing after that year? That's their last year of business. CEOs are paid bonuses at the end of years, not at the end of multiple years. And a lot of organisations, I think you do hear something around, a 5-year plan. And that's a bit long term, but how often do you hear an organisation come out with a 20-year plan or a 30-year plan and really start thinking about the long term? And there's quite a clear reason for this. It's because short-term goals are easy to action, they're easy to see, they're easy to measure as well, which is something everyone's obviously pretty obsessed with. And long-term goals are much more tougher, they're much more abstract, conceptual. It can be a little bit more difficult understanding how you're going to get somewhere. So I can understand why that definitely is the case. Now, why am I talking about this imbalance? Because it might have seemed like I've gone off on a bit of a tangent. But the reason this imbalance is important is because it controls the focus of an organization. If you are looking to implement a learning culture, you're looking to implement a growth mindset, that is a long-term plan. You are looking to achieve long-term goals. And if your organization is shifted towards being focused on the short term, you've just made that plan so much more difficult to achieve. If you're interested in the short term, generally you're interested in how much money am I going to make at the end of the month? Or how much money am I going to make at the end of the year? If you're starting to think about the long term, you start thinking, okay, so how can I make my staff better tomorrow than they are today? Because that's the most important thing, making sure my staff are in a better place. And maybe if we take a month hit because we're training people, but actually in 2 years' time, it means we're going to make more money, there's the benefit. So I think that's definitely something that organisations, I think, is particularly in the Western world, have a challenge with at the moment. So that brings us on to our next poll. Does your organisation prioritise long-term goals over short-term ones?
So the poll is launched. I'll just give everybody a minute or two to fill it in.
Perfect, thanks, Gail.
Just while we're waiting for that, there was a question earlier from Leslie. Do you have individual learning objectives so that people know where they're aiming for? and more importantly, can celebrate when they feel that they have got there.
Yeah, so it's setting it. You mean as managers, and are we setting our staff individuals learning objectives to help them improve and making them part of the KPIs? Is that kind of?
I'm not sure what Leslie meant, but I guess I interpreted it as individuals. Does
the
individual learner have specific learning objectives?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely
comment maybe and clarify.
If we take it as that instance, Joan, that's definitely something that we're talking to managers about, and it's part of the project that I mentioned previously, the Curiosity Group. It is really helping managers support individuals with their learning. So it's not having necessarily KPIs against your learning, but it's being able to really support and encourage it, so that it almost feels as like part of the job spec, not necessarily that it's expected of you, but it's encouraged, and it should be something that you'd want to do.
Yeah, and I think rather than just sort of, I think if you make it too formal, it can become a bit difficult. But if you're having a conversation with your manager and they say, you know, how's your week been? Like, have you learned anything new? That's a really nice informal way to shift that focus to learning a bit more.
And I think a lot of that, the reliance on that, is that the manager is really engaged in whatever you're talking about. So if the manager's passionate and knowledgeable in those areas, then it's a much easier conversation to have. If as Dan mentioned previously, if you're working for a manager that's got a very fixed mindset, then clearly they're not going to be encouraging that.
Yeah.
There was also a query about the definition of long term from Kevin.
Yeah, I would say long term to me is definitely going, having a 20-year plan, having a 10-year plan as a minimum. I think 5 years is fine, but I don't think it's that long term, not in the business world. So yeah, that would be my sort of, and if you want to have a 50-year plan, great.
That surprises me because things change so fast, and people are changing organisations as well quickly now.
And I would say you're not creating a fixed plan. So you're not saying in 50 years it's 100% where we're going to be. But I think if you don't have some sort of goal or purpose in mind, how do you know the short-term decisions you're making are leading towards the long-term goals of where you want to be? So it's got to be flexible and it's got to shift, and new technologies come in place all the time, which can't be ignored. But I think you definitely need that end goal of what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to get to.
Okay, so I think we'll close the poll now. Not everybody's voted, but I'll publish the results.
Okay, great. Okay, so that's really mixed.
I mean, the not sure ones are interesting because I'm presuming that's a communication thing potentially from the organisation, and that's something to bear in mind as well, how those medium long-term plans are spoken around. If it's purely financial targets, then what does that make people feel? I mean, a financial target probably, if it's a large one, to a salesperson might scare them. Mm-hmm. To someone who is creating content, they might not care because it doesn't really affect them. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, I think for the people that are yes, I think you're probably in quite a nice position to if you don't already have one, to be implementing something like a learning culture, because your organisation is probably thinking about things in the right kind of way. I think for the people that are either no or potentially not sure may have a bit more of a challenge in place. Great stuff.
Yeah, another comment in the chat about 5 years being the max.
Yeah, and I think public sector is a really interesting one. I think if you start to think about, I guess, getting into how politics work, the governments change every 4 years. I don't want to get into politics too much. I feel like that's an absolute rabbit hole. But I think things changing 4 years causes its own problems, and I think that's seen. I think definitely
short-termism is kind of a big issue potentially with politics.
Yeah. And I think that's reflected across the board.
Well, let's not go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. we have a blank screen. Good. Okay, you're on the case.
Yeah. So we just wanted to leave you with some. So I've just seen someone mentioning the rabbit hole. Yeah, it definitely is the rabbit hole. It's,
swiftly on.
Yeah. So we wanted to leave you, I guess, with some practical tips. I think one of the first one, management buy-in at all levels, we absolutely flogged that horse to death. So I'm not going to go into that too much, but that's definitely tip number one.
Yeah, so second one, get addicted to negative feedback. And I guess what we mean by that is seek out someone you trust and ask them, what can I do better? I think we mentioned previously that if you do something 100% and someone says, well done, obviously it's nice to get that type of praise and recognition, but actually you probably don't learn that much from that.
Yeah.
If someone's turning around and saying, you could have done this slightly better, or I would have potentially looked at that, or have you considered this? Yeah. And that's when you do that real learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've just gone through appraisal process, and but, I turned around to my manager in my meeting. I said specifically, like, what am I bad at? And the first thing that came up with was organisation using the CRM shock, which I already knew. But then there were other points that came up after that, which I hadn't thought about and I hadn't considered, and I've instantly taken those and gone, right, okay, what can I do differently around this? And I've taken actions on that. So it's definitely something. Ask someone you trust. Ask someone that you know is not just going to be negative, but give constructive feedback. And take that on board, definitely.
I've just seen Joe's comment, can we say constructive rather than negative? Yeah, of course we can. And that's kind of what we mean. We're just trying to be a little bit controversial, I think, and just say something. But yeah, that's exactly what we mean. Constructive feedback, that's when you do your best learning.
Yeah, it's asking what you're bad at, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, the third one, make learning difficult. And again, what we mean by that is, again, we kind of alluded to it previously, but rather than just reading something and doing that informal learning at your desk and not sharing it, make sure that there's a platform in place that you can really impart that knowledge onto your peers. So if you can explain something that's fairly complex to someone, then it means that you properly understand it, rather than that you just learn a paragraph of a text.
Yeah, and this is coming down to practicing the skill of learning. If you're practicing making learning difficult for yourself, you'll become more effective, I guess.
Yeah. So the next one, create a supportive environment. Again, I think this should be fairly clear from what we've been talking about. We need to be in a situation where people are happy to share not only their successes, but what's not gone wrong. Potentially when we were looking at the GE example and case study previously, it could be argued that wouldn't have been a supportive environment to be sharing your failings or, asking questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And finally, the last one, give yourself time. So this is really important, definitely. This is not a quick process. This isn't something as an individual or as the organisations you're working in will be able to change really quickly. So you need to give yourself time. If you're 3 months down the line and you've been trying to change your mindset and you're still struggling, don't worry about it. That's absolutely fine. I think it's something that as we're doing, I still have days where I'm like, I'm probably not thinking about that in quite the right way. I need to sort of reflect and think, can I come at this from a slightly different angle?
Yeah, I think just quickly before we end, it's worth noting that obviously we don't know all the answers at all. We're very, very early on this kind of journey, but we just thought we'd like to share some kind of tips or I guess a bit of an update as to where we are and what we've learned so far. Because hopefully it's come across that we are really interested and passionate on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are going on a bit of a journey with this. So we've actually created a website or a web page, around growth mindset. So it's www.virtual-college.co.uk/growth mindset. And there's some interviews with Brownlee Brothers on there. There's some other videos and tips and things like that. So feel free to go have a look. And if you want to get in touch with us, we're more than happy for you guys just to contact us directly and have a chat.
Yeah.
Are there any questions or anything anyone's got?
There was one about management buy-in. If somebody's asked for it, if you could just explain that a bit more.
In terms of trying to get management buy-in, I think from a management buy-in perspective, it depends what level of management you're talking to. I think it can be quite difficult if you're very junior or new in a company and you're trying to talk to someone very senior. Talking to your direct manager, I think that the key things are explaining the benefits of taking that long-term view, doing a program like this, the benefits that can come from innovation, creativity. There are lots of case studies out there where organizations have stifled because they have not been innovative, they have not been creative enough, and I'd say probably more than numerous occasions where management in those organisations haven't listened to the information coming from the bottom up.
Yeah, a great example is there's a big case study on Blockbuster versus Netflix, and that's really interesting. There's loads of stuff online reading about that, and so I definitely recommend having a quick look at that if people haven't.
Yeah, so I think from a management perspective, it's educating and informing, but ultimately, if you're being led by a leadership team that then isn't listening, you are struggling, because as I said before, it's something really difficult to push from the bottom up.
Yeah.
We've got another couple of questions under Q&A, guys. So Mark says, how much time is enough time? How is this quantified, or should it be?
How much time is enough time for what exactly? Is that is in giving yourself time to take this stuff on board?
Yeah, I think so.
I'd say years, I mean, it's something, I think if you ever think you've nailed it, you've got it completely right, and you don't need to pay any more attention to it, you're probably already on the wrong track.
Yeah, I think something that you're working on throughout
Constantly.
your life, you never complete it. You always need to, consider, how do I continue to improve? How do I get better?
Yeah.
What do I slip back into certain negative habits potentially, and how do I approach that?
Yeah, I think it's really easy when someone gives you a bit of negative feedback to instantly become a little bit defensive naturally.
Yeah.
But it's about how you I guess pay attention to it and keep addressing the way you're thinking about things.
But I think that's a long-term response. But you talked about sitting watching a TED video. So in terms of a normal week, what would typically you be doing?
So yeah, I mean, I think Dan mentioned it's kind of fitting that informal learning in between your day-to-day role. Clearly, you're going to have weeks where you're more busy than others, and you have actual deadlines. And to me, I try and set aside probably at least, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes a day if I can, and whether that's on my lunch break at some point, to have a look through some of the websites that I like to look at and see if there's any updates on TED Talks. Look a lot on LinkedIn. And look at the conversations that people have in terms of debates, and if you follow in the we all know the kind of the key, I guess, like thought leaders in the industry, they're always sharing brilliant stuff, and that's where I get a lot of my stuff from, really.
Yeah, and I'd say there's some interesting articles out there. Definitely, I saw one a few months back that was they said they'd done some mathematical research behind it. I hadn't digged into all of the data, but that if you weren't doing at least 5 hours of learning a week, your knowledge was becoming old or outdated based on how things were changing.
Yeah.
So as I say, I don't know about the research behind that, but that seemed like an interesting thing to have a look at. Maybe we could find it and share it. I mean, for me, it's personal learning is something I do inside and outside of work. If I'm interested in things like growth mindset, I'm quite happy to look at stuff outside of work as well as inside. So, I'd say there's probably not a defined answer, but 45 minutes a week in work would be reasonable.
Yeah, no, and I think talking about sharing, I don't know whether you've seen the poll results, but I think you're possibly the first who've scored 100% there on.
Well, that's good to hear.
That's good to hear. Yeah.
And I think it has been very useful, and it's particularly relevant. I think that you're on this journey yourselves as an organization. You're trying to help other companies to become, to develop learning cultures, and you're walking the talk. It's great.
Yeah, and I think we definitely we've 100% bought into it, and we definitely see it as something that can help people not only in their working lives but in their home lives as well. And that is, it's really important for us to share that, definitely. And if anyone can get anything useful from it, then that's great.
Yeah. Or if anyone has any ideas about potentially other things that we can do, then we're more than open to hearing that. But yeah, great. Thank you very much, everyone.
If you could stop sharing, I'll just pull up the eLN website.
Yeah.
And show people.
I'll stop sharing.
And hopefully everybody can see that. So I just wanted to flag up a couple of upcoming face-to-face workshops that the eLN is running. And it's the same workshop, but in 2 different locations. So Tony Frashina, who's, as you know, is probably, well, you may not know, but he's chair of the e-learning judges team for learning tech. And he and Sam from Sponge, who's a senior learning designer there, they're putting together a learning design workshop in Manchester on the 11th of June. And we're going to repeat that in London on the 16th of July. So I'm really looking forward to what that's all about. We're signing up people now. All the information, as you see, is on the website. And a date for your diary is that we are going to be holding the annual conference on the 20th of November in London in the same venue as before, although I believe it's changed names. So there will also, I think, be a virtual reality workshop in London, probably in September. And we also have an event in Glasgow on the 6th of September. Booking's not up for that yet, but we'll put that up there soon. So yeah, I think there's not much more for me to say. Just any other comments from people on the chat? I like to see some of the ones that are there now, so very positive and honest and fun. Excellent. Great share. Yeah, reflection is key, Kevin. I mentioned earlier that I work with people on the Henley Business School Masters in Leadership, and keeping a reflective journal is one way that they encourage those participants to reflect on what they're learning. They're obviously doing academic stuff, so they're going online, looking at papers, reading books, looking at literary models. There's lots of stuff out there, but they then have to apply that to their own leadership practice. And reflection is, I think, the one thing that really, really helps people to take the learning on board, embed it, and then apply it. Because it's not much good if you just keep it all in your head and you don't have it feeding through to the day job. So, more comments? Oh, guys, I don't know if you want to comment on any of these. Kevin, yeah, one thing that I've noticed before on these webinars is there's one person in the States who's been coming to these and having a working lunch with the team while they go through it.
Oh, great.
Finding ways of coming through and chatting together about this is obviously good.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're glad people enjoyed it. Really glad.
Excellent. Well, listen, thanks very much, everybody. I will stop the recording now. And thanks for joining.